You got an Australian beach behind you, but you got a turtleneck on. I love it.
This photo was taken yesterday about a mile from here. It's a lovely part of the world. Even though it looks nice, it is a frosty 3 degrees Celsius outside. So
a little nippy.
A little bit cold. That's why I'm wearing
nippy.
That's why I'm wearing a roll neck jumper.
So are you enjoying yourself being at home?
Gee, it's really different. Well, on the one hand, it's the more things change, the more they stay the same. But it's fascinating to see the world through a different lens. You know, I spent the first 6 months of the pandemic in Dubai, which is a crazy bubble, and then I spent the next 2 years in Athens, Greece, which is a different kind of bubble. And now I've traveled 25 hours across the globe to Australia, which is a new kind of bubble. But like I say, it's a different lens. This is the Pilote podcast with Corey Smith and me, David Fuller. This week, I call in from Melbourne, Australia to talk about the disruption that is inflation and recession. How are you? How's your week been?
Busy beaver. Just work. Nothing exciting. Nothing terribly exciting.
In Europe, you know, the summer is the time where people kind of go on holiday, down tools. You know, the schools are off, etc. Is that the same in the States, or people just work all the way through all year?
No, it's absolutely vacation time. As you know, I went several weeks ago down to Florida to Walt Disney World for vacation, where I got COVID, and it was packed. They're calling it revenge travel. You know, everybody was cooped up for 3 or 2 years for COVID. So yeah, everybody's out. All the kids are out of school. So, you know, here in the neighborhood out in front of my house, you know, everybody's out. Everybody's taking trips right now. You know, we just had the big 4th of July holiday earlier this month.
Right.
So everybody was traveling for that.
Is that the kind of the official beginning of summer? 4th of July?
No, we're getting towards the end of summer. So the beginning of summer here is Memorial Day. So that's the end of May. That's when the kickoff, when kids get out of school.
Okay.
And we're getting towards the end of summer, which would be what we call Labor Day here generally, which is the 1st of September. And that's when all the kids go back to school.
That's weird because Europe, August is the month that everyone takes off. Nobody does anything in August.
Yeah, it's usually June.
Although it's 40 degrees Celsius in London, which is
that's hot.
It's like 100 degrees in your money. The UK, the United Kingdom, is not built for anything over about 30. Less than 5% of buildings, including homes, less than 5% have air conditioning.
I can't even imagine.
It is not built for heat. You know, the railway lines are buckling, the roads are melting, the gardens are burning. You know, there's a botanical gardens near where I used to live where all the trees are not used to anything above about 25. So 40 is hot.
It's hot. I think they're having it worse there. We had some pretty rough heat here, and you know, we live in the South. We're used to the heat. It was extreme, over 100 here for a couple of weeks. And I saw some recent on social media people in Texas literally going out and frying eggs on their driveway.
As you do.
I
guess it's a TikTok, is it?
Of course. Where else would you find that kind of content?
I'm increasingly shocked by the content I get on TikTok. I just oof. I thought it was bad in Dubai. The Australian content on TikTok is just, oh dear. Maybe I'm just old, Corey. I don't know.
But you know, you get the benefit of being able to go to different continents and see the different algorithm feeds that you get.
Yeah.
I only get to see what's here in America, and it's interesting.
Right.
I'm sure you get some interesting things in Australia.
So what are we going to talk about this week?
Lots to talk about.
We're going to start with inflation.
Interesting conversation that we've been having about inflation. I'll let you go first.
My piece on inflation, and I guess we've got some big themes that seem to be developing on this podcast, but one of them seems to be this lack of shared history, lack of general understanding of certain concepts. And the reason inflation is a problem. And,
Yeah.
it affects different people in different ways. But what I've noticed on some social media platforms, including LinkedIn, which we talked about last week, the way LinkedIn is changing and the way
Yeah.
different people are using LinkedIn to do different commentary. But I saw a couple of posts. And this is the problem with trying to teach economics via meme. I saw someone who'd sort of put out a post that said, "Inflation is stealing." Huh? I don't understand.
I'm not connecting
These
the dots on that.
memes, people are stealing from me because my $10 doesn't go as far as it did a year ago. Okay. There's no actual understanding of what inflation is, how it happens, what the macroeconomic drivers are. I do think that there is a narrative out there and people are believing it that somehow this is government's fault. Now, partly it is. Partly it is the government's fault because they printed too much money during the pandemic and they gave people stimulus checks, probably with good intentions to keep the economy rolling along while everyone was sat at home and nobody was working. But printing money is not a good thing.
Right.
And what Gavin Newsom's trying to do in California at the moment, which is give people more money to counter inflation, is completely the wrong thing to do.
Right.
The problem with inflation, the reason that prices are going up is that people have too much money.
And on the surface, that sounds counterintuitive, but that's actually how it works.
If somebody can get away with charging you $12 for a latte and you pay $12 for a latte, then they'll say, oh, maybe I could charge $14 for a latte. And if people keep buying it at $14, then they'll keep putting the price up.
Right.
The reason I wanted to talk about inflation was mainly because it seems like there is a general misunderstanding of what it is and how it works. And there seems to be a lot of people blaming governments and presidents when actually they should be perhaps turning to their favorite global brand and asking why they're putting the prices up.
There's a lot of rhetoric and, like somehow that's one person, whether it be the president or a prime minister, somehow has the ability to control or manipulate global oil futures.
Well, yeah, I mean, you mentioned something interesting about the underlying cost of oil is not that expensive at the moment, is it?
No, I had heard or read that recently that the cost of a barrel of oil today is actually lower than it was 4 years ago at this time. And they're like, how come gas prices keep going up?
Well, I think that's supply chain. That's
right.
It's not the price of the barrel of the oil. It's getting the oil to where it needs to be.
It needs to go. And also understanding that, well, we need to drill more in the United States or the Keystone, all these kind of, everybody wants a simple answer.
Right.
The Keystone Pipeline. Well, the Keystone Pipeline doesn't actually bring oil, allow oil in the United States. It's a pipeline that goes from Canada to the coast of Texas to get oil out of Canada to other places in the world. It doesn't provide oil to us. People don't, that's a nuance that people don't want to listen to. Right. Or the fact that, I learned this recently myself, learned a new thing when I went to the oil and gas conference earlier this year, is that the oil that they pull out of the ground in the Middle East is so good, so pure that it doesn't require a lot of refinement. The quote that they told me was that it's so pure that you could almost literally take it out of the ground and put it in the car. Whereas oil that they pull out of the ground here in the United States, in Texas, as an example, requires refinement. Right. And that's the cost, is refining the oil. Yeah. Right. So there's costs, like you said, there's supply chain costs, there's getting it where it needs to go costs, there's refinement costs. So but those are nuances that people don't want to think about or read about or perceive. They want a simple soundbitey answer. So it's the barrel of oil costs less. So why does gas cost more? Well, I mean, it's complicated. Well, they don't want to hear complicated.
It's this lack of collective memory. I paid about just over 2,000 euros for my ticket to Australia from Greece to Australia. And that's a long flight. And I think, is that expensive or not? Well, in 20 years ago, in 1999, I flew from London to Australia and I paid exactly the same price. So airfares haven't really gone up in 20 years. So you can complain about inflation in the last year.
Right.
But it's, over the long term, prices certainly haven't gone up that much, and neither have wages. So it's interesting to have a new lens Australia reacted to the pandemic very differently to the rest of the world. They had very long lockdowns. They had very strict conditions, but also the economy runs in a different way here. And one of the biggest problems in Australia, at least, is that people left. We talked about the great relocation either last week or the week before.
Yeah.
And a lot of people return to their countries of birth. And now those people are asking a question. They're saying, well, do I go back to Australia or do I look for opportunities elsewhere? I've got choices now. I can go to Dubai, Singapore, or do I go to Australia? Now, some of those people have decided not to come back to Australia, in many cases because Australia isn't very welcoming to those people. And there's no one to work. There's no one to work in the abattoirs. There's no one to pick fruit off trees, drive trucks. All of this stuff that we take for granted, it's hidden somewhere underneath the flashy ads. And it's a big long-term issue. We drive people towards going to university to get high-paying, white-collar information economy jobs. But who's going to do all the other stuff?
Right.
You've got to be coding by age 15. You've got to get yourself a job at Google. No one's thinking about how we're going to feed these people. It's a lack of long-term thinking. We're focused on the all-time high cost of Bitcoin and whether our lattes deliver hot in 15 minutes, and no one's looking at whether or not we've got enough food to feed the planet.
I've been spending some time thinking about it. There's a docu-series on HBO Max right now called The Anarchists. And it's this group of people. They're from all over the world. They're largely from America, unsurprisingly, who they've just had it with everything, and it's all the government's fault. And they're anarchists. Anarchist beliefs stem from anarchy. The core of the word means to not be governed. They are governed by no one, right? So they all moved to Mexico, which is like in their mind a failed state. They love failed states, and they're all going to move there and be governed by no one. And they're borderline between, not that all of their ideas are incorrect about where the governments fail us, but they take it to the extreme, right? But it's this kind of thinking that, okay, we got problems like the climate, right? We have climate problems, we have economic problems, we have problems in our culture, like where we've overeducated people and we've not put an emphasis on trade jobs, right? Like we have that problem here where, as my wife has 2 PhDs, and she'll be the first one to say that not everybody needs to go to college, right? Like I have a very good friend who is a master mechanic at Range Rover, Land Rover, Jaguar here in town. They can't find mechanics.
Right.
They just can't find them. They're paying like $70,000, $80,000 a year for mechanics, US, and they can't find anybody because there's no mechanics.
Right. Which is why the price is going up. Right.
Right.
If you've got you've got to pay your plumber or your builder or your $100 an hour, then of course things are going to get expensive.
That's why things are expensive. We have all of these kind of societal ills. And rather than try to tackle them, everybody's answer to it is like, fuck it, let's leave. Let's move to Mexico and just kind of fuck it, move to the beach, and we'll start our own anarchist society and just do what we want.
But that's always been a thing, right? They've always had cults and people who are anti-establishment and preppers and all of these people,
Well, I haven't really kind of put all the thoughts together yet, but that's really kind of like what the vibe in America has been in the last 8 years is everybody's just like, fuck it. Fuck you. You do you. Like I'm a conservative and this is what I believe in. Fuck you. And like, oh no, I'm a liberal and fuck you.
The concept of conservatism and anarchy are diametrically opposed.
Right. But they somehow have found each other.
You can't be a conservative anarchist.
It's largely these people that have considered themselves ultra right-wing conservatives or libertarians that are attracted to this anarchist lifestyle, which is bizarre.
So I can see that. I can see why they want to, be anti-government and be anti-rules and whatever. But surely conservatism is about the establishment and maintaining the status quo. It's not
Correct.
about,
That's exactly right.
it's not
But
about
like,
maintaining.
I digress. That's a whole other topic. It's just interesting to me that all of these things within, like inflation being one of them, the recession, all kind of come back to, and many of these topics are just like poor management.
But I saw some of the Web3 crypto people sort of saying, oh, we can't, Coinbase can't be allowed to fail, because if it does, the whole industry is going to go down. It's like, well, hang on a minute. For the last 2 years, you've been ranting about decentralization and how your cryptocurrencies are so much better than fiat currency, and yet now you're asking for a bailout.
By the way, that's a big thing in anarchists is cryptocurrency, of course.
Of course, because it's outside the system. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. This whole idea of all of these things there's some connecting tissue with all of it.
This lack of planning, and the pandemic was the same. There was a pandemic plan, and they ripped it up and threw it away, and they thought, it'll never happen. It'll be fine. We don't need to plan for that. And hey, recessions happen. Where are the plans? Let's talk about recession resilience. You've had some thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say this conversation is timely. Is that we've been in my line of work, we've just been having some discussions. I've initiated discussions of, we need to probably pivot. My stock and trade for the last several years has been talking about innovation and transformation. That's what gets me excited to talk about. But with a lot of our customers, we need to kind of pivot the conversation, right? We need to talk about less innovation and transformation and more recession resilience, right? Because for many industries, that's where we're headed for the next couple of years, at least anyway. And the funny thing is, when we're having these conversations, there's a lot of hand wringing. What are we going to do? And it's like, well, we're going to do the same thing that we're doing now. We're just going to call it something different.
Right.
It's the same technologies that we're talking about now. It's the same data, like demand forecasting, hyper automation, RPA, all of these things. It's the same thing, except we're just talking. As we know, it's marketing, capital M. Positioning.
One of my very first jobs when I worked for Unilever was as a demand planner. Forecasting was my job.
Right.
And that was
right. So
22 years ago. I'm amazed how many companies don't do forecasting.
Unbelievable. But now we're just talking about it differently. We're talking about things in terms of how we're going to improve efficiencies or optimize performance and reduce costs, rather than how this is going to help you grow or position you for the future or whatever, right? Everybody's like, what are we going to do when the economy shrinks? Of course, we work with a lot of industries that aren't going to shrink. We work in automotive and manufacturing supply chain, even home builders, because, they've been so backed up that it's going to take 18 months, 2 years for them to catch up. Other industries probably going to feel a little bit harder, retail, commerce, whatever.
You can now listen to all of the Pilote podcasts as full episodes on YouTube. There are also a few bonuses as well, so check it out, subscribe, and please leave comments.
The question that I wanted to ask you about, which I've been waiting all week to have this conversation, is how do you think the recession is going to affect spending in the business world on investments in the development and adoption of Web3 tech in the business world, not just in general? Do you think it'll slow? Do you think it'll maintain?
It's hard to say. I would hope that it would force some people to, as I said a little bit earlier, I would hope that it would force some people to focus on what's really important.
Yeah.
How do I create something that's, more sustainable, more useful, more long-term, better use of resources than the other issue, which again, which is something I sort of said at the beginning, that this is a 2-speed or a 3-speed problem. There's too much money. There's too much money. These people who are investing in Web3 are throwing billions around. $41 billion here, $21 billion there, $8 billion here. Inflation doesn't mean anything to someone who's investing $41 billion into a metaverse project. They just don't care. Cryptocurrency has been appreciating at like 500%, 1,000%. They're quite happy to accept 1,000% returns on cryptocurrency, but then are worried that costs are going up 10%.
Right.
Right. If you've got 1,000 times more money than you did last year because you invested in the right cryptocurrency, but the prices haven't gone up 1,000%, then you've got a lot more money than you had. So you can't complain about prices going up if you've benefited from cryptocurrency.
Right. They're in the cryptocurrency market where pricing can fluctuate 20% a day.
A day, an hour.
An hour, right?
It can go up and down 25% in an hour and be up 1,000% over the last 5 years, but then complain that the underlying prices that you're paying for goods have only gone up 10%. So I think cryptocurrency is part of the problem. If Ethereum is actually worth $3,000 a coin when it used to be worth 10 cents a coin, then people have benefited from that increase in value, but have been paying the same prices for their goods and their price and their cost of living. To answer your question as to whether it will impact the development of Web3, I don't think it will have that much of an impact. Where it will have an impact and where we're already seeing it having an impact is the people who've relied heavily on leverage.
Yeah.
So people who have benefited from 0% interest rates or basically negligible interest rates, if interest rates go to 2%, 3%, even 5%, then that will have a massive impact on people who have leveraged their positions for cryptocurrency 5 times. And we've already seen that. We've already seen a bunch of exchanges declare bankruptcy because they've done a GFC and they've lent money to people who didn't have it, and they've allowed people to leverage their positions in a way that was unsustainable. And there's a tiny little run on any of those exchanges, then they just don't have the liquidity. There's no consumer protection. There's no banking laws. There's no regulation. There's nothing that says that any of these exchanges have to back their positions with any other asset. Paper houses, house of cards, and they've all gone. They've all just been rug pulled and founders disappeared. 3 things, I guess. The ones that were not built on fundamentals have disappeared or will disappear. The ones that are leveraged will struggle to continue. The ones that have billionaire or trillionaire backing will continue to build. They've got enough runway. They've got enough, money in the bank, cash in the bank to be able to continue building for 2 years. Maybe they'll pivot. Maybe they'll change their product, mix slightly. Maybe they'll innovate and maybe they'll focus on things that are a little bit more important or things that they can deliver in a more short-term period. Maybe they'll cut costs. We've seen a lot of them literally just sack a lot of people. They've just overhired. So they've got rid of a bunch of people to reduce their costs, which effectively increases their runway. The billionaires aren't going to care about inflation. They're still going to run their private jets, their super yachts. They're not going to notice.
I haven't run into anybody yet. It's too early to have this conversation like a customer that is making these investments to be like, so where's your head at? Like, I think that there are some customers that we're working with that are investing in Web3 like technologies, like an AR, that are going to continue to invest in it because they see the time to value is being short enough that they're going to be able to use it regardless of what happens to help them achieve short and long-term goals. And they're going to continue to invest in it. Like I said, I'm surprised, like we work with a lot of financial companies and bank financial institutions that are surprisingly not investing into things that I would expect them to be. And I think this is just going to continue to be an excuse for them not to invest in it. But, we work with large financial institutions, so they're not interested in consumer-based banking, where blockchain is kind of happening now.
Right.
Insurance, I have seen a lot of investment in blockchain and NFTs. I think they might pause. I know one, in fact, is, but not because of the recession. I think they'll continue to invest in the things that they've already decided they're going to invest in, but I don't think they're going to make any new investments.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
I would agree with that. This really does focus the mind on the product. What are the real benefits of Web3? And we're using Web3 in a sort of ill-defined fashion. But take the underlying technology of blockchain, for example. I don't think that's going away. It's just whether or not the benefits of blockchain are really there. Do I have to do it on the blockchain, or can I do it? Can I get the same result using existing technologies? And what's the cost difference between those two things? What's the thing that says it must be in the blockchain as opposed to being able to do it via conventional technology? If you're looking to reduce costs, if we're looking at transformation, disruption, inflation, yes, it'll come and go. People will get that under control. There's other massive things going on at the same time, right? So we've got things like climate change, we've got things like pandemics, we've got the future of work and mobility, and we've discussed that. If one of the ways companies can significantly reduce cost is to stop having massive office buildings in the middle of the city, and have people work from home, then investing in metaverse style working environments for people collaborating globally across the world. I know Microsoft is investing heavily in that space. Yeah. Allowing people to collaborate in sort of more Web3 style, metaverse style environments, then that could be an argument to sort of say, by investing in Web3 style collaborative work tools, that enables us to reduce our physical costs of having people in offices around the world, or allowing people to work from home and therefore not have to commute and not spend 2 hours in the car a day and not have to spend money on gas. If you got some bright people together and said, right, how do we pivot our Web3 thinking to solve real world problems? How does Web3 solve inflation? How does Web3 or the metaverse solve cost of living? How does Web3 or metaverse solve?
Right. How does Web3 reduce costs?
Yeah.
Create efficiencies, right?
Collecting digital art is going to be an irrelevancy for a little while. You can't really say, I just spent $1 million on a Bored Ape and then complain about the fact that your coffee costs more than it used to.
Correct.
Inflation hurts people who are poorer, of course, because as a relative percentage of their income, it's more. If you've got some fat and you're managing to save up and buy holidays and whatever else, then you're cool. You can absorb a 10% price increase. If you're literally scraping by and you have no money left at the end of the month, and suddenly you've got to spend $100 more per month, then it's going to hurt you a lot more than anybody else. So again, I don't think that the people in the real world are going to care less whether or not someone's NFT isn't worth what it used to be. Right. There's some very, very big structural issues underneath this, because inflation is a global problem. It's not just in the US. It's happening in Australia. It's happening in Greece. It's happening in Europe. It's happening in Asia. Sure, it's because governments around the world pumped too much stimulus into the economy during the pandemic. Yeah. And people couldn't spend it. The reason why people are going traveling like mad at the moment, because they need to spend the money on something. All that money is still out there just floating around. If a company, doesn't matter whether it's an energy company or an oil company or an e-commerce store, if they decide to put their prices up 10% and people keep paying, I don't think it's necessarily got to the point where a lot of people have sort of said, well, I'm going to buy one less Starbucks this week because I can't afford it. They have this expendable cash, but they don't have enough to buy a new house because the prices are so high. But they do have enough to go on vacation, right? Yeah. Or, the restaurants are full. Right. People are going out. I don't know how we can be in recession when the economy seems to be booming. If it sure feels that way, the way people are spending, right? Now, I know a lot of these measures like CPI and how they measure GDP and various other things are measured at an absolute macro level. The inflation is usually measured on a basket of goods. And that basket of goods doesn't necessarily change. You can go for 30 years and have that basket of goods be exactly the same, which is why some people are sort of saying, well, there's a difference between real cost of living and what the official inflation rate is. That's because the official inflation rate used to be based on things like the price of milk and bread and eggs.
Right.
And people are buying other things these days. Growth is the same. So if you're saying, okay, what is recession? Recession officially is 2 negative quarters, I believe.
That's right.
And that's measured at a GDP level. That's measured at a gross domestic profit level. And gross domestic product is impacted by things like how much coal you're exporting, or whether Boeing sold 5 787s this quarter or not. Thanks for listening. Don't forget, you can talk to us and leave your comments on our various social media accounts, from Twitter to LinkedIn and now YouTube.
Be back.
I was saying that GDP, gross domestic product, which is effectively how they measure whether or not we're in recession, or whether the economy is growing or not, that is measured at a macro level. But that doesn't necessarily mean that every single company is not still growing or making profits. So there will be sectors that just continue to grow.
This inflation, this recession, I don't know if inflation, but certainly recession is necessary to kind of right the ship.
There was a prime minister in Australia who was treasurer, actually a very interesting guy, Labor treasurer, who was the one who was responsible for floating the Australian dollar. And he presided over a recession, which he called the recession we had to have. And he got a lot of stick for it, because obviously a very unpopular notion that slowing the economy was a good thing. But yeah, absolutely. We need to put the brakes on. And I'm surprised that the Fed hasn't increased interest rates more.
We've got this weird place, and I don't know if it exists in other countries, where it's like, okay, we got the recession, right, which is the natural mechanism to kind of right the ship, at the same time as we have inflation, which is, what we kind of dealt with in the late 70s here in the United States with, like the gas crisis, if you remember, the energy crisis. And then we have this weird kind of like job crisis where certain types of jobs they can't find people to fill them. You can't get anybody to work at a restaurant, or like these kind of service industry jobs, or mechanics, or people that plumbers, or repair air conditioners, or these kind of what they would consider trade jobs or manual labor jobs. But at the same time, there's an abundance of people in other jobs. Like there was like this massive thing at the end of last year where like I was getting phone calls day and night from companies that wouldn't even talk to me before, offer me ridiculous amounts of money for jobs, and then they just disappeared.
Nobody really thought about who was going to do the work.
Right.
We've created these, incredible $1 trillion companies that have got, very highly educated, very expensive people building software. But what happens if everyone who's picking fruit off trees goes home?
Right. Then what?
I mean, no one's built the robots to pick oranges or olives. Amazon might be a fair way down the road in automating their parts of their supply chain, but they still rely on people on $20 an hour to go and pick stuff off shelves and work 8-hour shifts walking from one end of a warehouse to the other. We live in these cities in the first world, expect that if we one click on Amazon, it gets delivered next day. And if we don't, we jump up and down and complain, but ignore the fact that somebody has to go and pick that thing up off a shelf in a warehouse and put it in a box and send it to us. And then somebody else has to deliver it, has to get in a truck or a motorcycle and hand it to us just because we're too lazy to walk down to the mall like we used to.
I know, isn't that the craziest thing? But, as long as you don't go to the bathroom, Amazon's okay. And then the flip side is like Tesla laying off thousands of people. But then there's all these people looking for. We live in a confusing time, David.
There have been parallel. I mean, again, it's sort of first world problems. I remember, back when, there were people who wanted to be actresses and actors in Hollywood, and they'd all go to, Hollywood, but they basically worked for 30 years as waiters and waitresses because they never made it. These days, I think there's unfortunately a generation of people who think that if they take their top off and stick it on TikTok, then they don't have to be a waiter or a waitress. They can make their money doing as a creator in the creator economy.
Well, remember, it was first they were YouTube famous. Now they're TikTok famous.
In my day, they would have stacked shelves or waited tables.
Like the thing that people aspired to be, like when they wanted to be famous, wanted to be like in a band. They wanted to be a rock band. Or like you said, wanted to be an actor.
A different work ethic. They definitely used to be a different work ethic, I think.
We're starting to drift into that, hey, you kids, get off my lawn.
I know we are, but I do kind of see it. I don't necessarily see, and it's cultural. There's a certain class that isn't driving cabs as a second job, that isn't stacking shelves, that isn't working as a checkout person, to earn a little bit of money. That's beneath them. But you can do it other ways now, right? So you could start an e-commerce store, a drop shipping e-commerce store. So why should I break my back doing manual labor for $7 an hour when I could set up a Shopify drop shipping store and do a little bit of marketing and earn myself 10 times more than I would stacking shelves? That's great, but someone's still got to stack the shelves.
But I don't fault anybody for coming up with that concept. I was just having this conversation with my son last night about being able to go out and identify on Amazon products that people buy and then finding it and then selling it and having Amazon dropship it. Like that's a thing that you can do now that you couldn't do before.
There's plugins that do that for you, that actually go into the Amazon API and tell you what position on Amazon you get to if you spend a certain amount of money and how many units have been sold globally of that particular SKU. And I don't know whether it's still possible with China's supply chain the way it is right now. I don't know whether it's possible to do what you could do pre-pandemic. But yeah, there are opportunities. How's his Tornado video channel doing?
It's my other son that was doing that. He just quit his job.
Really? I worked my first job I was delivered papers, right? I delivered the local newspaper on a Wednesday afternoon on the back of my bike.
Right.
And then my first job in a store, I worked in a fruit and veg store, and then I worked in a supermarket in the fruit and veg section. I did that all the way through my final years of high school and most of my university career. I worked a couple of nights a week and weekends because the store was open on Saturdays and Sundays. I learned a ton. It gave me life experience that I still draw on today. And somebody brought this up in a Web3 discussion. There was a big metaverse conference in Paris this week, and somebody commented that there were a lot of comments basically from young people who are working in the metaverse space that haven't been through the 2002 .com crash, that don't remember the GFC, that are making decisions based on very little information. And I think that things like not having a high school job or a job when you're a student and then going into building virtual worlds. How can you build virtual worlds if you don't have that life experience? If literally the only thing you know is what you learned at university and you go straight into a job without any other life experience or any other work experience,
right?
How can you have any empathy for people who are using your products? I think there's still a lot of heat in the economy. Everyone's talking about recession, but to me, there still seems like there's a lot of money. There's a lot of companies making profits. There's a lot of executives giving themselves pay rises. There's a lot of stuff going on, which is going in one direction, super growth. And then the other direction, obviously, there's a lot of people losing their jobs and a lot of people that are going to find it really tough. Like I said, 10%, 20%, 30% increase in groceries is going to impact a level of the market, level of the economy that's really going to hurt. It's the distribution, to me, that seems the problem at the moment.
Yeah.
At a macro level, it's almost impossible to say what's going on. At a micro level, there's some people who've got more money than they could possibly spend in 10 lifetimes, and others that can't afford their groceries. So the problem is, as is always the problem, has always been the problem, this problem of of distribution of resources and income. People are going to argue against tax. That's what tax is for.
But that's distinctly un-American.
So I haven't read this article. You've put something here about the AR contact lenses we discussed last week.
Yeah, so after you posted that, I meant to share it with you. I went out and Googled it, and lo and behold, this company is being, or I don't know if it's the same company, but a company is being funded and accelerated by Disney. And Disney actually has a market accelerator. And the company is called Mojo Vision, and they are making those contacts that you're talking about.
Okay.
And so they're exploring many uses for them, and the link I sent you, which we can share in the notes for the podcast this week, shows many, and the link that I sent you goes right to the time about the contact lenses. Shows some of the many uses that they're using it for, but one of the uses that they're using it for is as a teleprompter for their newscasters.
Okay, that makes sense, I guess.
Right, like not a very exciting use, but a really practical one.
Yeah.
So it's a teleprompter, but it also is showing images and doing like you could do virtual or like augmented reality, like animations right in the contact lens against the green screen, so they could do like weather. They could see the weather patterns and stuff. It's pretty cool. I just thought that was cool.
I don't know how disorientating that would be. I mean, it's so close to what's the depth of vision? I'm gonna have to talk to my ophthalmologist friend about how that works.
And they
I never had Google Glass. Did you ever have a Google Glasses? Or
no? I tried and I was never able to get them.
Your eyesight long term, having to look at something literally sitting on your eyeball and having to be able to read at that distance or be able to interpret something at that distance.
Right, I know.
Must give you headaches or something. I can't imagine how that would work.
Well, soon enough, the Apple glasses will be out.
Again, so I don't know I can't imagine what the long-term impact on sight might be of having to focus at that distance for any length of time. I mean, the eyes were not designed to do that, right?
No.
Their eyes are evolutionary designed to see beasts coming across a plain so that you can hunt them for food. They're not designed for reading something at eyeball distance.
Well, let the lawsuits begin.
Just as an aside. So I flew from Athens to Melbourne with Scoot, which is this budget airline.
Right.
And not budget airline. It's a low-cost airline operated by Singapore Airlines. And actually, It was perfectly comfortable. It was brand new 787 Dreamliners. But the first flight was 10 hours and then a 5-hour stopover in Singapore and then a 7-hour flight, I think it was, from Singapore to Melbourne. The interesting thing, I've never been on a flight that long with no in-flight entertainment. So there's no screens in the back of the seats and there's no in-seat power. So the kids were freaking out because the check-in line, again, there's hardly anyone working in the airports in Greece. There's not enough baggage handlers. There's not enough check-in staff. There's not enough people to run an airline. And Heathrow has had the same problem in the UK. They basically have told Emirates and other airlines to stop flying because they can't deal with the number of flights because they don't have enough baggage handlers on the ground. And because of the pandemic and vaccination certificates and all sorts of other problems that they've introduced. So travel used to be pre-pandemic, travel was incredibly streamlined. You could check in online via the app. You could have a QR code. You didn't have to stand in line. I had carry-on bags, so I could have, if I wanted to, walked straight out of the taxi into the gate lounge, and that wouldn't have been a problem pre-pandemic. Now I had to stand in a line with 400 people so that a check-in person could confirm whether or not I had the right visas, vaccination certificates, and everything else. So it took an hour and a half standing in line in a busy terminal. I was wearing a proper 3M medical N95 mask, but an hour and a half in a queue.
Wow.
Then another queue for security, liquids and laptops and all of that kind of stuff. Then another queue for exit to stamp me out of the country. And then another queue to get onto the plane. So it was literally 2 hours from arriving at the airport to getting on the plane, and I didn't get to sit down. I was standing in a queue for that entire 2 hours. Then I got on the plane, and all the people who were on the plane with me had been using thein phones for those 2 hours, right?
So their phones were dead.
So the phones were dead, and they got onto a 10-hour flight with no in-flight entertainment and no in-seat power. So there was it was almost riots on the plane as they all sat down in their seat, got their chargers out, and then realized there was no way for them to charge their phones.
That is amazing.
They had no battery left for a 10-hour flight. I'd brought my trusty iPad, which has got quite a long battery life, and I hadn't used my iPad in the queue. So I was able to watch some things that I had downloaded, which was quite interesting. I actually watched an Australian series called Barons, which is loosely based on the early days of the surfwear industry. So
really?
It's loosely based on Quicksilver and Billabong and Rip Curl brands. Yeah, and the development of board shorts and the surfing brands. Interesting. It's eight episode series. It was fascinating to see how reliant people have become on their devices, especially in a situation where they don't have any other form of entertainment. Sure. So they had to, end up talking to each other, or I'm going to have to buy a book. Man. I'm going to buy a book for the way back, like an old-fashioned paper book that doesn't need batteries.
Imagine a book.
How analog is that?
You got a big day ahead of you.
I'm going to go to the Big Smoke. I'm going to drive up to the Big Smoke, see some mates, and as I said, get an understanding of what's really going on here.
And we'll pick it up again, same bat time, same bat channel.
This is for people who don't listen to podcasts as podcasts. Every episode, every full-length episode of the podcast, all 21 of them, is now on our YouTube channel. So if you prefer listening to your podcast via YouTube,
you may now do so.
You can now listen to every episode in full on the YouTube channel.
I think that's great.
And they're all bookmarked, which is really cool, which means now that if I want to have a go at some, or if I want to engage in the discussion on LinkedIn, and it's something we've covered on the podcast, I can now send them to the particular minute of the particular episode where we discussed it. All right, Corey, have a good week.
Yes, you too, sir. Enjoy Australia, even though I know the weather's cold. Enjoy your mates.